Hey everyone, I thought it might be interesting to predict patch 0.1.1. I will cover possible balancing changes, new features, new classes, cheaters, including a certain billionaire, game mechanics, and much more. I will not discuss items, class, or skill balance because there's so much else to discuss. Let's dive in. Grinding Gear Games, in case you're unfamiliar with them, if you're a Path of Exile 2 player but haven't played Path of Exile 1, does this thing where they announce they're going to do an announcement with the sole purpose to generate some hype, and is working because I'm making a video about it. And I'm not the only one, I'm sure. Other companies try this too, but what GGG has going for it versus other ARPG companies is that they actually make a good ARPG for starters, and they also have very fleshed out and consistent updates with tons of content, so people have been conditioned at this point to get hyped and see that hype pay off, as new content is generally speaking very exciting. It's one of the few ARPGs next to Torchlight Infinite, in my opinion, that delivers on the hype. Which leaves us with the question why they're doing an announcement for patch 0.1.1, in terms of numbering only a minor patch. You would think that if there was something big to share, the patch number would reflect that, meaning it would be patch 0.2.0. And that leads me to believe that we're not getting a big update just yet, such as the Ranger or the Druid, but rather a bunch of smaller changes fitting for a minor patch, but those smaller changes likely have a ton of impact, which I think is why GGG wants to come out and explain those changes. The final reason for doing this announcement is, I think, a very simple one. The game is done incredibly well. The player retention is completely bonkers. The 24-hour peak was still 264,000 players just on Steam alone. That is not including the standalone client, and the game so far has been a massive success. I'm still playing, I'm having a blast, and I have no doubt that in a year or two this game is going to be the new standard for ARPGs for the next decade, just as Path of Exile 1 is the standard for the last decade. It is that good, honestly, already. I think the devs want to acknowledge this success, thank the players, thank everyone for the feedback so far, and simply inform us of the short-term plans. GGG had a month or so to have everyone post feedback. They've had a week now to collect it all after the holidays and pick the biggest contenders and pain points, and they use this format to address some concerns, share their short-term vision, and maybe explain a thing or two that may not be that obvious to players otherwise. As to why they're doing an announcement and then a podcast, first of all, this is pretty standard for Grinding Gear Games, as in Path of Exile 1, leak announcements were always followed by a Q&A with Ziggy D. Second of all, the game is in early access, and rather than writing a manifesto, which is a one-sided story, they prefer in this stage of the game to have a dialogue, and thus they opt to visit several podcasts. This happened before the Path of Exile 2 launch, and I expect they're going to maintain that flow, bring out consistent updates, visit a different podcast each time to clarify the changes and answer some questions, and that way try to be as in touch with the community as possible. I think a very logical and practical approach to early access game development. Predicting new features is probably the hardest prediction to make. I honestly don't think we'll get many new features, but rather changes of existing features. For example, I don't expect we'll get anything new in the endgame, but I can imagine perhaps that Alice progression is getting a small rework so that towers are to be made more interesting. I think a fairly safe prediction would be loot filters, online loot filters which were recently released. They may even give a shout out to Filterblade, which will update the website soon if he hasn't done it already while writing this script. And of course, loot filters on consoles are going to be a big thing and would make a lot of people happy. Again, I don't think we'll get a Ranger or a Druid. I would imagine that is a 0.2 patch. In short, I think the focus isn't new content, but rather existing content explaining balancing changes and interacting with the community. They didn't have time to develop many new features with the holiday season either, so I think this is a pretty safe bet. Overall, the campaign is the part of the game where I have seen the most people agree, in that it is just great. I share that opinion. The campaign is amazing, the boss fights are spectacular. It's tough but fair, and I think the reason it can be tough isn't so much the campaign, but the lack of balanced skills and classes. I started with a minion infernalist, which was great, but the other day I tried an ice sorcerer and it's completely atrocious compared to that minion infernalist. So yeah, that's definitely an issue. The only thing I feel may get addressed is the size of the maps in the campaign, maybe in particular in Act 3, but a lot of that criticism came before they implemented the checkpoints and the fast travel mechanics. Maybe they will simply add a few more waypoints or checkpoints in those massive maps. That would already solve something, but otherwise I don't think much will change in the campaign. I predict they are absolutely going to address crafting, and for the most part I think they will defend the crafting system by saying that right now it's a lot of RNG, but it's better to design it like this and add deterministic steps later than the other way around, which is basically what Last Epoch has. When it comes to crafting, I hear the comment a lot that Last Epoch crafting is so good, but it is so deterministic that it lacks some depth, and if you would play that game for longer, I think many people would realize the downsides of being able to choose every single modifier on an item. It's great because other ARPGs have a lot of crafting RNG, and in that context it feels like a relief to have many quick upgrades, but it's not good for the longevity of endgame or endgame crafting for those same reasons. It is too easy, too deterministic, and a lot of praise comes from the fact it's easier than in other ARPGs, but that doesn't mean it is necessarily good or a good idea. And if you would play Last Epoch in a vacuum and not be aware of other ARPGs, you would get bored of this crafting system, in my opinion. I got bored of that crafting system after around 2000 hours. Well, that's how much I played the game, but you get bored way earlier than that. And ironically, once you want really high tier endgame gear, it's just as much RNG, if not more, than in Path of Exile. I think it's much more problematic than people give it credit for, and I think the PoE 2 system isn't all that problematic, if only we had a step or two where we do have more agency on what happens with the crafts. In theory, those already are in the game with omens, essences and expedition crafting to an extent, but they're so rare that almost no one can use them. Especially in Solo Self-Found, greater essences and omens simply don't exist. In addition, new league mechanics and systems will add more crafting currency over time, will add more ways to influence crafting, and will lead to a more enjoyable crafting journey. The system is only getting better from here, but right now we have to bite the bullet a little bit. It will be worth it though, in my opinion. I predict that they tweak the numbers of the crafting currencies, especially throughout the campaign. I think they'll make omens and greater essences more common, maybe also through the Atlas passive tree. I also think they will address runes not being able to be unsocketed and at least explain themselves for this decision. I do hope we get to unsocket runes to give us a bit more freedom in fixing resistances. I think that would be a nice feature to have also in Solo Self-Found. But for now I think that is about it, as they probably won't want to mess around with the crafting too much yet. Other systems like loot on the ground and such are connected to this system. Chance orbs are connected to this. The uniques you drop are connected to this. It is all interwoven, and while not entirely balanced, I think it's mostly in line with what they intended. In Solo Self-Found at least, I do pick up base items from the ground still and craft on them. I do that at level 96. I still show rares, which I wouldn't do in Path of Exile 1. Loot still has value because of the state of crafting, where you keep needing base items, and loot having value is something the devs don't want to give up easily, I imagine, even if that means crafting for the time being is pretty much total RNG. It's not a great situation, maybe, but I think defendable, and I think they will in fact defend the state of crafting. Small self-plug, check the description for Google Docs on all my SSF stuff, account name, POBs, Atlas trees, etc. There's a Discord link in there as well. I have a guild, Thy Guild, feel free to join in-game. And don't forget to subscribe, guys. Okay, back to the video. Another contentious topic is the Ascendancy Trials. At the launch period it was pretty much universally hated, also thanks to some bugs. But now that we're a month in and people figured out the fights and we have some good relics and some good builds, the Ascendancies are way less of an issue and pretty much on par with the lab in Path of Exile 1, you could say. A few weeks ago, I was struggling to make it through the 3rd Ascendancy, and yesterday I farmed around 10 level 80 Sekamas and ultimatums without failing once. Sometimes things simply take a bit of time to settle, and we've had that time, and I think without doing anything on the developer's side, the Ascendancies are already in a much better place than they were. As a side note, I do agree with Rax that traps and on-death effects have no place in an ARPG, but at least the traps won't go away, I don't think, because they play such a pivotal role in the Ascendancies. That doesn't mean that either the players or the devs are happy with the Ascendancy situation. From the developer perspective, it would be good to clarify the philosophy on the 4th Ascendancy, as that is still very tough to achieve for many people. Is that the intention that it's tough and a good number of builds won't have those Ascendancy points? Is it too hard? Is it an idea to split the achievement or the Ascendancy from the loot, so you can ascend by completing the trials but you're not rewarded if you fail? It would make the trials easier, but I'm unsure of the vision here. I think this topic is definitely coming up, but I'm not sure what they will say. I think overall they may be rather happy with the way it stands now in terms of difficulty, giving people something to strive for in the endgame, like I did. Only at level 95 I got my final Ascendancy, and maybe that's just not a bad thing at all. Up next, endgame. First, it's good to remember that this endgame was sort of thrown together last minute in terms of development, which basically means thrown together in the last few months. They somehow still created a more enticing endgame than any other ARPG out there except Torchlight Infinite and Path of Exile 1, but it's good to remember that this endgame isn't necessarily what the vision is on endgame. We don't exactly know, however, what the vision is, and I imagine we'll get more clarity on that in the podcast. It's weird to assume that this endgame is totally different than how they envision it, because why would you make something that is completely not in line with the actual vision? Even if it's a few months of work, you wouldn't do that. That's not a sensible thing to do. So I think the endgame is actually a lot more in line with the vision than most people think, but it has several components and balance issues currently that it wouldn't have in its final state. I think, for example, that traveling across a world map will stay in the game with the waystone system rather than maps, but perhaps the towers won't remain or will get significantly reworked because right now they're a little boring. On the other hand, I've seen some creators go completely on a tangent about towers, about something you spend literally 30 seconds on before getting back to juiced maps, so I think we should see it in perspective in the grand scheme of things. Towers, yeah, they're a bit boring, but it's not the end of the world either, right, in endgame. As a matter of fact, I think very few things are the end of the world in endgame. Very few things are fundamentally broken, and endgame overall works quite well for what it is. So what will get addressed, in my view? For sure, citadels. The spawn rate will be going up, that's just something that must be done. There's no reason not to, really. In line with that, I expect the Arbiter, the final boss, to be balanced as well. I killed him once, but the one-shot potential of this dude is off the charts. It's not that well telegraphed either, and with us only having one go at a boss in Path of Exile 2, something needs to be done here. The towers, again, it may get a rework as mentioned earlier, but I think for now they are staying. They also provide temporary goals in endgame, pathing towards them, running them, and putting in the tablet, uncovering the rest of the world. I think that is undervalued by some people, and removing towers would remove that experience, making the endgame even more free format without a real purpose. I don't think they will do that because there isn't much of a target otherwise. At least these towers, piercing through the fog, provide some direction. Yeah, there are those citadels that you can't find, they also provide direction, but for the rest it's just aimlessly wandering and blasting maps. Which is fun, but sort of without purpose in terms of an endgame, as you're not working towards anything. I think they will address the maps themselves and their layouts. Some are just absolutely terrible and they feel horrible to play, like File Factory, Sun Temple, Augury, and they're super common too. Or it's because they're so terrible that you think they're super common. This will come up for sure in conversations, although I'm not sure they will simply remove some maps. Maybe, I think they can. And because they're randomly generated and they already have most of the assets from the campaign, maybe it's not too hard to create a few more maps to replace them with. It doesn't seem to me it's a ton of development work, but that's just me guessing. Something else I personally would love to see in maps is the same fast travel mechanic that we have in the campaign, so we don't have to backtrack all the way when we miss a rare monster at the start of a linear map. And on the topic of rare monsters, I don't expect for now they will change how we complete maps. I think some thought has to go into that, now that completion is tied to traveling the world map, and I think for the most part killing rares works fine. It's just that if you miss a rare, you blame the fact that you need to kill rare monsters as the prime reason, but I think it's more of a map layout issue rather than a killing rare monster objective issue. I wouldn't want to see map bosses in every single map, for example, as some have suggested, with the way these new bosses are designed. They can be absolutely brutal and terrifying and very tough as designed, and the whole idea of the devs was to have people make a deliberate choice to fight such a fierce opponent in the endgame. I think they'll stick to that vision, so only 25% of the maps will have a boss. In the rest, you will be killing rares. Or maybe they come up with yet another mechanic, such as killing 90% of the monsters as a win condition. I wouldn't mind that either. I want to make some predictions on certain league mechanics, 3 of them to be precise. The first is Ritual. I think they will increase the drop rates of the King of the Mist invite, so people like me can actually get the passive points on my level 96 character after 325 hours, most of that spent in endgame. That would be great, and again, I see no reason why they would gatekeep those drops. I'm hoping there are changes to the loot as well, and I'm hoping the loot will be smart loot, like Ritual is in Path of Exile 1, which means that the loot is just a lot better than a bunch of random items, has mods with high tier affixes, has good base items, and overall it's worth checking out. It would also be pretty great if they could add the option that the loot filter would apply to the Ritual loot like it does in Path of Exile 1, but those are all nice to have things. The King invites are the biggest concern, and I'm expecting they address it. The second league mechanic is Delirium, which has the exact same issue because Delirium splinters are super rare. I think Delirium overall is a little bare bones, but nothing that calls for immediate action. A 200 or 300% increased drop rate of the splinters would go a long way for me. So, 6 splinters per map, please. The last league mechanic is strongboxes, and I'm only putting that in there because GGG already announced in the last patch they would make strongboxes less terrible. For sure, that means that monsters will spawn a lot faster and maybe even all at once. It may mean the loot from strongboxes is going to be buffed as well a bit, although I would be completely fine with just speeding it up, see how people like the new strongboxes, see how rewarding they truly get, and then take it from there from the dev's perspective. That's what I would expect happens at least. And maybe buff those abysmal numbers in the Atlas passive tree for strongboxes. I don't want to go into classes, skills or items, although I do expect some balance changes there. I do quickly want to touch on the energy shield and armor discussions that have been going on, where the gist of the energy shield one is that in particular Grim Feast, but energy shield overall is incredibly powerful, especially compared to life. And armor seems broken in a bad way, also because it can be broken by map monsters, pun intended, and Creparian made some very enlightening videos about armor, showcasing how bad it really is. It's impossible the devs missed that, so I'm expecting an update on armor for sure. The last topic of today's prediction is on cheating, Elon and politics. First, there's been some duplication bugs going on, where cheaters have been able to generate a ton of chase uniques, in particular the Temporalis, a chest armor that is highly desirable. These items flooded the market in trade, and while this of course didn't impact me playing SSF, this cheating and duping has been so rampant, there's no way the devs are going to be silent about it. The only question I have in this regard if they deem it a good subject for a video or an interview. They could use it. You can really make a stance, make it clear to 300,000 people or so that this behavior will be severely punished, which it will be. There's no doubt about that. These people will be banned by the full force of GGG, including IPs, devices, names, accounts, etc. There's zero tolerance on this bullshit. The question is simply if they want to use the opportunity of the update or podcast to talk about it. I think they will for the duplication cheaters. But what if it's not just random dudes duplicating the biggest chase unique in the game, but it is the richest man on earth, none other than Elon Musk, which has been cheating and has publicly streamed his adventures on a boosted account. Allegedly, guys, allegedly. I don't want to suffer the wrath of the Musk, but yeah, it doesn't look good, does it? All of the footage is out there. It resulted in some pretty hilarious clips in which Elon didn't even know how to slot in a waystone on a level 96 hardcore character. And GGG has the data, of course, to check if indeed it is likely or even proven that the account was shared in the best case scenario or simply boosted and bought from Asia or something. They can see that, I'm sure. Assuming Elon cheated, of which pretty much everyone who looked at the clips is convinced, what should GGG do about it? I think if they find evidence, there's no question they will ban his account. That's not what I'm getting at here. I think he will be banned for sure. What I'm trying to figure out is, will GGG be using this for publicity, or I should say for even more publicity, or do they deem it not a great idea? Because it's free PR, right? What could go wrong? On the one hand, yes, it is of course great marketing, it is free PR. This will be headline news and memes for years to come. Elon Musk, who claims to be a top 10 gamer, but is in fact secretly boosted and is clueless about the game that he claims to be top 10 in. It's a pure win for grinding gear games, you would think, and they could even tap into it more and make some fun about it or whatnot, or some memes themselves. They're not beyond that, asking if you don't have nets in Path of Exile 1. And I think if this would have happened around 2 years ago, that's probably what they would do. Suspend him for a season, use it for marketing, there's really no harm in that almost. Maybe even Elon could see the fun in that. He seemed to be up for a joke back in the day. However, on the other hand, these days Elon Musk isn't just a genius tech guy anymore with 4 different innovative companies. These days, he's the right hand of the president-elect of the United States. It's someone who started to get involved with not only US politics, but German politics, Italian politics. He may want to finance buying Greenland, annex Canada, and who knows what else. And I don't want to get political here per se, but it's clear that Elon Musk and politics these days are entirely interwoven. And if GGG publicly starts announcing bans against him in this capacity or even makes fun of the situation, it's quite likely there is significant backlash from that political aspect and the political supporters of Elon Musk. And there are a lot of them, right? We're not talking about a random incel chat group here. We're talking about many incel chat groups here. And is that really worth the media attention? That's the question I would be asking myself if I were the marketing team of GGG. And I would probably decide that, yeah, we're going to ban his ass for a while, maybe the duration of early access, as it's perhaps not warranting a perma-ban here, but we're not going to publicly discuss this any further because the harm that can do to us, the company, the people working here, is simply greater than the gains. So I think it's not a question that's permitted to be asked, and I think they're going to resolve this in private, and maybe only respond once Elon starts making a fuss about being banned. That's all for the political predictions, in a sense, and that's also it for this massive video. Oh wait, there's one more thing. Everyone's favorite subject. Yes, Magic Find, also known as item rarity. They have to say something about it, for sure, but I don't know what the solution is. The devs have been pretty hell-bent on having it. They were fully aware of the consequences of this stat in the earlier versions of the game and on gear and put it in anyway, so I'm not sure how likely it is it will be removed from gear. Me, and I think many others, would love that if that would happen, but will it happen? I'm not sure. Maybe the stat itself just gets nerfed a little bit at the top end, increasing the diminishing returns. The issue is, it just won't solve anything. So yeah, but this is a tricky one, because I don't think GGG is willing to scrap it entirely at this moment in development. It basically just got there. But that's really it. I hope you're enjoying these predictions and this video. I'll be watching the whole thing and see which predictions made it and which didn't, and then you'll hear from me again, sort of assessing my own video. I hope you had a good time watching this one. Let me know what you think. Also, let me know your predictions, guys. I'm really looking forward to that. Let me know if you have any suggestions, subscribe and like for more PoE SSF content. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. Love you all. See you soon. Bye bye.